Hey guys, I'm going to show you how to set up a project for either re or construction. So we're going to start with this estimate, which hasn't been sold yet. Normally the customer would sign it and approve it, and that's how it gets sold. So I'm going to replicate that just by hitting the sold button. You don't actually do this because the customer needs to sign off on it, but for the purpose of this video, I'll do it that way. Okay, so estimate has just been sold. Now, the next step is to initiate the booking for the job, right? So instead of selecting any items here, when we go to initiate booking, we're going to actually not select any of these items because these items are going to mess up our project tracking. For project tracking, our actual expenses are going to be based only off of purchase orders. Or if you wanted to create a purchase order from items in here, you could do what's called a requisition. We can talk about that later. But for right now, don't use any of these items when you initiate booking. Instead, we're going to create 3 items after the estimate's been sold, and they're going to be 3 different project stages. Okay, so we're going to go to tasks. We're going to start with project planning stage. Okay, so you can see that right here. Okay, then the next one is going to be our rough-in stage. Then the next one is going to be finishing. Okay, so we've got finishing, startup, and commissioning. That's the final stage. Now, see they each have their own project label here. We're going to create a job initiate booking for each one of these. So we're going to create a job for project planning. All the time, materials, anything done during this job that we're going to create for project planning is going to be tracked and associated with the project planning stage. Same for rough-in, same for startup. Then we'll know how much time and materials we're spending for each phase of the project. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and always do this, it's very helpful. Our payment structure is generally 50% upfront, 40% upon completion of the rough-in stage, 10% upon completion of finishing, startup, and commissioning. And it'll say that as the payment structure in the bottom of an estimate. Okay, so project planning stage, for that we should have a 50% deposit. Okay, so I'm going to take the subtotal here because the GST will be calculated on this invoice. So don't worry about the GST, just go with the subtotal. Okay, then for rough-in, I'm going to do the same thing, but 40%. $6,790.02. And then for finishing, we're going to get 10%. That's what we should have when we're done this stage. Okay, so these are your references for what you're going to bill for each stage of the project. The only exception here is for the project planning stage, we do bill the 50% upfront. But for these next 2 stages, this is what we're going to put on the second invoice and 10% for the third invoice once these stages of the project are complete. Okay, so 10%. We've got this all set up. And what we're going to do is we're going to do our initiate booking. Okay, we're just starting this project. We're just doing some of the planning and getting things set up, and we want to track everything that's related to that stage. So we're going to pick this project. I'm going to pre-job, and we're going to pick project planning. Okay, so this is important. The job type is project planning, and this is the business unit here, re. If it was construction, obviously you do construction. There's a project planning job type for that as well. And we've got that project booked. Okay, so now when we go into our project, so we've got that job. You're going to have a job 2237 project planning. Okay, so I'm going to complete this job just as a simulation, but you'd see I can dispatch to that job. I'm going to arrive to the job. Now, we're going to simulate this getting completed probably would have spent a few hours on it. Probably won't have any purchases or anything at that stage, but if we do, we're going to attach a PO to this job. Okay, so if you do need to buy anything, you attach the purchase order to the job you're on. Okay, I'm going to complete this job. See, this is the invoice here. Now, this is where this part comes in handy. See the description, how I put the amount in here? $8,911.90. Okay, I'm just going to copy that. And I'm going to change this item here and put that in the unit price. Okay, so now I've got the number here. Save. There you go. We've got an invoice for 50%. And we're going to send that off to our customer. Okay, so now that I've adjusted this pricing in here and we just have a single line item, note it doesn't have any cost on it, just a price. Okay, it's 50% of the invoice. Now, they've already sent us a draw for this, so they'll have a customer credit, and we're just going to apply that credit to this invoice when we do payments. To our project, and you can see here on the financials that everything's accurate. So in our billing section, this is all the amount billed here. We've got our budget, which is the initial estimate amount. All of this budget comes from the estimate that was sold. All the actuals come from any items placed on an invoice or a purchase order. Okay, so that's why we don't want to include any items from the estimate on the invoice, because then it's going to count it as a real expense when it's not. You didn't actually purchase anything through the estimate or invoice. You purchased everything with a PO. So right now, this is accurate. We've got 50% billed right here under actuals, and that goes underneath the project planning stage here. Okay, so you can see it's broken out the taxes and the subtotal, and then the total amount is here under billed. Then when we go to expenses, you can see we've only got $1.83 under project planning because that's for the time that I was booked in there, which was just a few minutes. But you can see that that's accurate. Particular sign, we have sort of doubles of these. That's because the construction labor, this is construction labor for project planning. Okay, so now we've finished the project planning stage. We've completed this job. So now we want to get going on the rough-in stage. And now we're going to initiate a booking for the next stage. Initiate booking, rough-in stage. See how now it's associated the job with project planning? We're going to do the same thing with the rough-in stage here. Okay, I'm going to book a new job. All the same as before, except this time, of course, we're going to do rough-in stage for the job type. Okay, very important you put the right one in here. This is important for project tracking. Then I'm going to fill all this stuff out here. Once this is filled out, we're going to book the new job. Okay, so we just hit arrived. We're at the job, we're on the clock, and now I'm going to show you guys how to do a purchase order for this stage. Okay, so now that we've booked that rough-in stage job, you can see under jobs and appointments, in the project section here, we have a rough-in stage job with a separate job number. So now for all the work you do, for the rough-in stage, you're going to do it through this job. So we go in here, all your appointments are going to be for rough-in are going to be on this job. So you might have 3, 4, 5, however many appointments it takes from start to finish on your rough-in. All your purchase orders and costs and everything associated with your rough-in stage of the project is going to be associated with this job on any of these appointments. Okay, they'll all be under this job 2240 rough-in stage in Vancouver. Okay, so I'm going to create a purchase order for this just to show you guys what it looks like. Okay, so this is the purchase order screen from the office side. So if you're doing a purchase order from the office, this is what you're going to see. Same principles as mobile, just a different layout and maybe a few more options. One way that's going to help you categorize these purchase orders in the project tracking is to use a project label. Okay, so let's say this purchase order is for materials. You can put materials. Now, if it was for extras, you could put extras, although that wouldn't be applicable on this job because it's not a change order or an extra. But you could add, let's say it was just equipment, you could add equipment. You don't have to break those things out. If you want to, you can. You'll get more precise tracking if you do that. If you make a purchase order at RSL for the equipment and then tell them to put all the materials on another invoice, you could break them out that way and you get even more accurate numbers. But for this one, we're just going to put materials, and that's going to associate this purchase order with materials in the project tracking section. It'll show up specifically in the budget versus actual section as materials. So that's pretty helpful. Okay, you'll notice I'm just going to put the unit cost at $1. In this case, there's a 12% tax rate. That's what we're paying in this case, so I'll just leave it like that. Sometimes when you're doing a heat pump, you might have to actually enter this in as a dollar amount because they're not doing PST on heat pump equipment, but they're still doing it on material, which has made things a little more complicated. But the easy way around that is just copy the dollar amount on your invoice from the supplier and enter it in here manually. But for this example, I'll just use a percentage in already. Okay, so I filled out this purchase order. We've got everything we need in here, at least for this example. So now I'm going to create it. Okay, it's going to take me back to the job with the invoice. You don't need to create the invoice just yet. So just go back to the job and back to the project. Now, okay, so we've generated the purchase order and we've done it through the right job, but it's still not going to show up on our budget versus actuals because we haven't sent the purchase order and we haven't received the purchase order. So right now, the system thinks that we've just got a purchase order that has not been fulfilled yet. It's just been generated. I know that seems a little strange because you guys do it all at once when you're standing at the supplier. And if you do it on the mobile side, I don't think you actually have to worry about this because it'll take care of all that for you, as far as I know. But when you do it from the office side, you have to actually let the system know that you've sent the purchase order out and that the purchase order has been received. So it's really easy to do. I'll show you how to do it right now. Just go into purchasing here at the top, then go to purchase orders. You're going to see the purchase order you just generated right at the top. You can see the project number here, the PO number, you've got the vendor, how many line items, and the amount. So that's including tax, obviously, $1.12. Okay, so then what we're going to do, hit these three dots here, mark as sent. You're not actually sending it to anybody in this case, right? So just mark it as sent so the system thinks that we've sent it out for a request. So now that we've taken this purchase order and we've actually sent it, we can go over to the sent section. See, we're going from pending. Pending means it's just sitting there waiting for somebody to do something with the purchase order. Now we've marked it as sent, so the system thinks or knows we've sent the purchase order. So now the system's like, okay, you've sent the purchase order, but have you actually received anything for it? Or is it just sitting in RSL's system waiting for someone to do something with it? So now what we need to do is actually take it and receive it. So the way we're going to receive this is we're going to check this box, hit the button here that says receive. All right, one purchase order, move to received. So now if you go to the receive section, these are all the purchase orders that we've taken possession of. So we have them now. They're not at the supplier. Okay, so that means we have it, we've purchased it, we owe money for it. That's what's going to trigger having this PO put into your project expense calculations. It's a real expense now because we've received it from the supplier. So now we can go back to the project And let's double check this. We'll go into purchasing in the project right here, and we can see that that purchase order has been received. So see how we've got first purchase order here is in pending for $1. So it hasn't been received yet. It's just, we've created a purchase order that hasn't been received. This won't be calculated in your actuals. This purchase order has actually been received. So it's accounted for, we've got it. This is gonna show up in your actuals. So you can look at purchase orders and the status of purchase orders in the purchasing section. So make sure that you use this to check up on things like that. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the financial section here, and we're going to look at the budget versus actuals. So for the rough-in stage, okay, so now that this purchase order has been received, let's go check out financials and see where it's been applied. So in financials, we're going to look at the budget versus actuals here. Now, notice in materials, there's 0 here for build because we haven't billed for that purchase order yet. We've received it, but we haven't added it to an invoice and sent it out or anything like that. So it's not going to show up as billed. But it is going to show up here in expenses. This is what we're looking at. So our budget for materials is $1,000, and that's coming from the estimate. The actual is $1, and that's coming from our purchase order that's been received. Notice the other one that's in pending isn't showing up. Only $1 showing up, not 2, right? Each purchase order was for $1, and only one of them is showing up. That's the purchase order that's been received. The other one's still in pending status, so will not be calculated. Other thing to note is that in these expenses, it's not including tax here. It'll include that at the bottom here. So see the 12 cents for that purchase order is broken out down here. The purchase order we've done here for $1 under materials, and this is just a general materials expense section here. It's not broken out by stage. See we're in the rough-in phase here, and the only thing the rough-in phase is showing is labor. So how this is set up right now is we've got all materials for the project, all equipment for the project, and then the labor broken out by phases of the job. So project planning, rough-in phase, and then we'll have the finishing phase as well. If you want to do associate materials and equipment with particular phases of the project, you would just add one of these tags to your purchase order. So you could do that. You could have it materials, and then you could have another tag as well that goes under the stage of the project you're at. This is not really required. We're really just looking for your actual material and equipment costs versus the material and equipment costs in the budget. So we just want to know if we hit our budget, if we're under it, are we over it, what's going on with that. It's not going to be incredibly helpful to see at what stage you used what equipment or materials, unless it's for a change order or something, but that's separate. We can talk about that later. Change orders are marked as change orders, so we'll track it as a change order. So really the way that this is going to be broken out is going to be materials for the project, equipment for the project, extras or change orders, those have their own tag, not on this project because we don't have a change order, but if we did, it would be in this section. And then labor for project planning, labor for rough-in phase, labor for finishing phase. And if you do it this way, then your budget is going to be all based off the original estimate, and your actuals are going to be all based off of purchase orders. Okay, so now that you've seen all of that, we're going to finish up the rough-in stage. So we'll just go to our jobs and appointments. Let's just say we're done our rough-in stage. Perfect. So I'm going to complete this job. Okay, let's save that. This is an invoice generated for the job 2240. It's essentially an invoice for the rough-in stage, which will be 40% of the total contracted amount. Now, we don't want anything showing up on here that has not actually been purchased. So we really just want to build them for this one task here, the rough-in phase. Okay, so I'm going to take this number. Remember we put this number in here in the description. This is where this comes in handy. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to change the unit price from 2 cents, which is just a placeholder in the estimate. And I'm going to put the real cost of completing the rough-in, which is $6,790. I'm going to save that. Adjusted this rough-in task invoice line item here. We've put in the 40%. The invoice subtotal is going to match what you put in here. And then it's going to charge the GST after the fact, which is why you use the subtotal for your description line here. Okay, so that's how that all works. You've got your materials here from the purchase orders. Just leave these in here. This is for tracking. This just shows that these purchase orders are associated with this job, which is fine. But since that they've got zero cost on them, they won't show up on the customer's invoice. And if you want to double check that, just print up here and you can see what their invoice is actually going to look like. And you'll see that if there's no cost here, it won't show up. Purchase orders, you can see they're attached here. You can see what they're for. All that stuff. So we're done with that. Now we're going to move on to financials, how this invoice is going to affect our financials, and then we're going to get into finishing. We completed that job. We adjusted the invoice. Now we're going to see how that affects our financials. So we've got our contract summary up here. Expenses, cost to complete, all that kind of stuff. Here we've got our budget versus actuals. We've got our build section. So this is the budget of what we were initially meant to bill, and this is what we've billed so far. So you can see, what have we billed so far? Project planning, that's the 50% draw. Rough-in phase, that's the 40% draw. And we're still waiting on the finishing because we have not scheduled that yet. Now, if we go into our expenses, you can see the expenses we have here right now are the $1 purchase order that we did, our project planning labor. So when you look in here, you can see construction labor, $1.83. Okay, and then for rough-in, construction labor was $51. And that's because of how much time's gone by with me on the job for the rough-in phase. That's where that's coming from. If you really want to see it and drill down a bit deeper, you can actually click on this actual number here. Okay, so you can see here exactly what the construction labor costs are. So you can see that this is coming from timesheet for job 2240. That was our rough-in job, and the date. So if there was multiple appointments with multiple days, you're going to see a whole list of these running down for each technician, what type of labor they have. That's what these project labels are. So it was for the rough-in phase, it was under construction labor, and it was a manager labor. Now, under my technician profile in Service Titan, I'm tagged as a manager. If you're an installer, you'll be tagged as an installer. If you're a helper, you'll be tagged as a helper. So that'll even all be broken out in here as well. You can see the actual cost. So this is my hourly rate. And then the burden rate is a calculation we've done for all the extra things that the company has to pay for every hour that somebody's working. So that's payroll taxes, truck expenses, things like that. So this is the real cost of having somebody on a job here, their wage, and then the actual overhead associated with them. So there you go. You can see exactly what these construction labor expenses are, and you can double check timesheets and things like that right here. So let's go back to the finances page. Okay, so that was for the rough-in stage. Rough-in stage is complete. Now what we want to do is finish up our startup and finishing phase. So we're going to go into the estimate and do the same thing as we did before for the other two stages. Initiate a booking. Click on finishing and startup. Book new job. Okay, We've got the right business unit here, and now the job type we're putting in is finishing and startup stage. Okay, and then I'll just fill in all this relevant information here. Okay, now that all this is filled in, we'll book the job. All right, and now we're going to open up that job. Okay, we booked a job for this project now. So we'll go into the project, jobs. You can see finishing and startup. We've got another appointment there for that. Job 2241. So same as before, I'm just going to dispatch, arrive. Okay, that just simulates technicians showing up for this job to do the startup, commissioning, and finishing. So it's going to be all your startup, it's going to be the commissioning, it's going to be doing the warranty, walking through with the customer how to use it, helping them with the thermostat, maybe set the schedule up for them, and the little loose ends you need to do to actually finish the job, call it done, and then get paid for the rest of the job. So that's what the finishing stage is all about. You really probably won't have any purchase orders in this stage either. So now what we're going to do is go into the invoice. We're going to do the same thing as we did on the other two. We're going to edit this line item here, copy the amount that we put in before in the estimate, and we're going to replace that unit price by pasting in the price from up here. Okay, you're going to say who this is sold by. So whoever sold this project would go there. Don't worry too much about that. The office can always adjust that. Okay, we're going to save it. Now, when we complete this job, this invoice for finishing is going to show up in our financials. Okay, so we'll go to this job here. I'm working right now. You can see I've been on for 1 minute. So that's where that labor cost is coming from in the construction labor section of the financials. Going to complete this job. Save the invoice. Perfect. Let's go back to that project and see what our financials look like. We've got our build budget, and that matches our actual budget. So we build everything from the estimate. Okay, we've got our materials budget, equipment budget, all that kind of stuff in here. And then we have all the actual costs of that in here. That's just for build, right? So that's why the materials and equipment isn't broken out, because we didn't build them separately from materials and equipment. We build them through these project stages. And then we go to the expenses. We've got the budget expenses versus the actuals. So pretty good. $1 in materials here. That's that purchase order. Then you've got the project planning here. So this is time. We've gone through all this. Rough-in phase, that's the time for that. And then we've got the time for the startup and commissioning here as well. You can see the costs are construction labor for that. Okay, so now what we're looking at is our margin. This is the budget that we had, and this is the actual, and this is where we get our gross margins here. So obviously this shows us like 100% because we don't have any actual costs. Well, not any significant actual costs in here, but when you do have purchase orders for the equipment and material and they show up, that number is going to show you how you did overall on the project and what kind of budget you were in. This is the number we'll be using for bonuses on projects and things like that. Okay, then you've got your invoices here. So if your customer wants their draw invoice, their rough-in invoice, or their final invoice, you'll have all three right here, nice and easy. You can tag them if you want. You could have you could tag them as whatever you like to help you organize them. That's easy. Just open the invoice and add a tag to it. And then after that, everything is good. You can just go to back to your dashboard. Normally this would have a project name and status and all that stuff, right? Like we would have been in progress. You've got planning, rough-in, finishing. Those are the statuses you update with. In this case, we're completed. I'm not actually sending out an invoice, so I could say invoice not sent. Or let's say we've sent all the invoices out, then we just mark it as project completed, invoice sent. So that tells everybody in the office the job's done, we've sent the invoice out, everything's complete. So that's a basic overview on how to use the project tracking for construction and re projects. If you have any questions, let me know. I've got this pretty well dialed. I just put the basics in this video because it's already long enough as it is. We'll get into some more details later if you guys have questions.